I'd been tracking these wolves for 6 days, but something was off. Each caller was covering distances that shouldn't be possible, 20 miles in 4 hours across ridge country. Yet every night the pattern repeated. This morning all 3 signals turned back toward my camp, and they were closing the gap too fast for wolves to travel. I work wildlife surveys for New Mexico Fish and Game out of the Silver City office. My job is simple enough. Track collared wolves, log their coordinates, document pack behavior, and radio in daily reports. The Gila Wilderness is one of the last places in the lower 48 where Mexican gray wolves run free, and keeping count matters. Each caller sends out a VHF pulse I can pick up on my telemetry receiver from about 3 miles out if the terrain cooperates. The work is solitary, technical, and quiet. Exactly what I wanted after 12 years of law enforcement where nothing was ever quiet. I'd set up spike camp near Turkey Creek on October 23rd, a Thursday. The forecast called for clear skies and cold nights, perfect survey weather. My camp was basic. A small dome tent, a bear hang, a propane stove, telemetry gear in a Pelican case, and a sat phone that I used for daily check-ins at 6 p.m. The area I was covering sat in the northern section of the wilderness, rough country with ponderosa pine giving way to mixed juniper and oak at lower elevations, rocky, steep in places, the kind of land that makes you earn every mile. 3 collared wolves operated in overlapping territories in my survey zone. Wolf M1904, a young male from the Dark Canyon pack. Wolf F2011, a breeding female from the Mogollon pack. Wolf M1887, an older disperser with no fixed pack, probably looking for a mate or new territory. Their collars transmitted on different frequencies, 151.45, 151.87, and 152.34. I'd check each one twice a day, morning and evening, and log the bearing and signal strength in my field notes. Standard protocol. The first day went normal. I picked up all 3 signals at good distances, plotted rough positions on my topo map, and noted their movements. M1904 was northeast near Willow Creek. F2011 held southeast near the Mogollon Rim. M1887 wandered west toward the Middle Fork. They moved like wolves, cautious, purposeful, covering ground at a realistic pace. I radioed my report to dispatch at 6 p.m. Weather clear, all callers active, no anomalies. They logged it and told me to check in same time tomorrow. Day 2 is when I first noticed the distance problem. I took a bearing on M1904 at 7 in the morning. Strong signal, roughly 4 miles northeast. I marked it in my notes. At noon, I checked again while eating lunch on a flat rock overlooking the creek drainage. The signal came from the southwest, strong and clear, about 5 miles out. I rechecked my compass, reset the receiver, and tried again. Same result. That wolf had covered at least 9 miles in 5 hours, crossing ridgeline terrain that would slow any animal down. Possible, but unusual. Wolves can cover distance when they need to, but they don't sprint cross-country in the middle of the day without reason. I checked F2011 next. She'd been southeast that morning near a known den site. Now her signal pinged from due north, 6 miles out. Another impossible pace. I looked at my map and traced the route she would have had to take. Straight up and over a saddle, through dense oak thickets, across 2 drainages. Wolves avoid unnecessary elevation gain. They follow game trails and contour lines. This route made no sense. M1887 had done the same thing, west to east, 8 miles in 4 hours. I wrote it all down, double-checked my batteries, and told myself the collars might be malfunctioning. VHF signals can bounce off ridges and give false bearings. It happens. I'd mention it in my evening report. At 6 p.m., I keyed the sat phone and gave my update. Dispatch asked if I wanted to scrub the survey and return early. I said no. I'd give it another day and see if the pattern held. They logged the report and told me to stay safe. That night, I heard something walk the perimeter of my camp. Steady steps, methodical, circling at a fixed distance just outside the firelight. I assumed elk or a passing deer. The steps were too evenly spaced for a bear, too heavy for a coyote. I didn't get up to check. In wilderness work, you learn that most things in the dark are just passing through, and spooking them by rushing out with a flashlight only makes the situation worse. The steps moved on after 10 minutes. I went to sleep. Day 3 was worse. I checked all 3 collars at first light. M1000, 904, northeast, 3 miles. F2011, south, 4 miles. M1000, 887, west, 5 miles. I packed a day kit, grabbed my receiver, and hiked northeast to verify M1000, 904's position. The terrain was rough, and it took me 90 minutes to cover 2 miles. When I stopped to recheck the signal, it had moved. Now it was southwest, behind me. I just hiked toward it, and it had circled around. I felt my gut tighten. That's not how radio telemetry works. Signals don't move behind you unless the animal moves, and wolves don't deliberately circle human trackers. They avoid us. I spun the antenna and took another bearing. The signal was clear, strong, and closing. It had moved a mile closer in the time it took me to stop and check. I keyed my handheld radio and tried to raise dispatch early. No response. The ridges in the Gila block line of sight communication, and the sat phone was back at camp. I wasn't worried yet, but I was paying attention. I started back toward camp at a steady pace, not running, just moving with purpose. Every 15 minutes I stopped and checked M1000, 904 again. Each time the signal was closer. It was following me. When I got back to camp, I checked the other 2 collars. F2011 was now northeast. M1000, 887 was now southeast. Both had moved toward my location. All 3 wolves were converging on my camp from different directions, and they were traveling faster than wolves travel. I sat down on my camp stool and forced myself to think it through. 3 possibilities. 1, all 3 collars had malfunctioned in the same way at the same time. Unlikely. 2, something had killed the wolves and was carrying the collars. Possible. 3, I was misreading the signals due to terrain bounce and operator error. Also possible. I ran a full diagnostic on my receiver. Battery's good. Antenna connection solid. Frequency calibration accurate. The unit was fine. At 6 p.m. I made my report. I told dispatch that all 3 collars were exhibiting unusual movement patterns, that signals were converging on my camp, and that I was considering pulling out early. The woman on the other end, Linda, asked if I felt unsafe. I paused before answering. I didn't feel unsafe. I felt watched. Not unsafe, I said. Just, something's not right with the data. She told me to trust my instincts. If I wanted to extract, they'd have someone meet me at the trailhead in 2 days. I told her I'd sleep on it and give her a final call in the morning. After I hung up, I went through my camp and secured everything. Bear hang higher. Tent zipped tight. Stove and fuel inside the tent vestibule. Knife on my belt. I'd spent years in law enforcement and had carried a sidearm daily, but wildlife work doesn't require one, and I'd left my personal weapon at home. I regretted that now. The sun dropped behind the ridge at 7:15. The temperature fell fast. I built my fire up and sat close to it, feeding small branches into the coals and watching the shadows around camp. At 8:30 I heard my own voice. It came from the trees to the north, clear and unmistakable. My voice, my cadence, my words. Dispatch, this is Survey Unit 4. Evening report. Weather clear, all collars active, no anomalies. It was my radio check from the night before. Word for word, exact phrasing, exact tone. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. I swept the beam across the trees but saw nothing. The voice stopped. Silence came back, heavy and wrong. I checked my receiver. M1904 was pinging from the north, exactly where the voice had come from, 200 yards out. I went into my tent, zipped the door, and sat with my back against the far wall. I didn't sleep. I listened. At 11 p.m. I heard footsteps circling the tent, slow, deliberate, evenly spaced, the same steps from the night before, but closer now. They stopped at the tent door. I heard breathing, low and wet, like something with a chest cold trying to pull air. Then my own voice again, quieter this time, just outside the nylon. Not unsafe, just something's not right with the data. My exact words from the sat phone call, my exact hesitation before the word unsafe. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I waited. The breathing stopped. The steps moved away. At 3 a.m. I checked the receiver inside the tent. All 3 callers were now pinging from the same location, 60 yards from my tent, due north, stationary. Wolves don't bed down in a tight group unless they're denning, and this wasn't denning season. Whatever had those collars wasn't a wolf. I made a decision. At first light, I would pack essentials, leave the rest, and move fast toward the Spruce Creek Fire Lookout Tower. It was 6 miles north, manned during fire season, and equipped with a landline. I'd done work near it before and knew the access road. If I pushed hard, I could make it by noon. I didn't wait for full light. At 5:30 a.m., when the sky went from black to gray, I grabbed my day pack, my receiver, my sat phone, water, and a headlamp. I left the tent standing. I left the bear hang. I left everything that would slow me down. I checked the receiver one last time before I moved. All 3 signals were still grouped together, same spot, 60 yards north. I marked the direction on my compass and started walking south, away from them, quiet and fast. For the first mile, I didn't look back. I didn't check the receiver. I focused on my feet and my breathing and the growing light filtering through the ponderosa. At the 1 mile mark, I stopped behind a thick tree trunk and checked the signals. All 3 had moved. They were south now, ahead of me, between me and the lookout tower. I felt my hands go cold. That wasn't possible. I'd been moving south for 40 minutes at a hard pace. There was no way anything could have circled ahead of me without me hearing it. The terrain was too rough. The ground was too dry. Branches snap. Leaves crunch. I would have heard something. I adjusted my route to the southeast, angling toward a different drainage that would still get me to the fire road. I moved faster now, not quite running, but close. Every 10 minutes I checked the receiver. Each time the signals had adjusted to match my new direction. They stayed ahead of me, always ahead. At hour 2, I broke into a clearing near an old stock tank and stopped to catch my breath. I was sweating hard despite the cold air. My legs were shaking. I keyed the sat phone and tried Linda. No signal. The ridges were blocking me. I checked the receiver. The 3 signals had split up. 1 north, 1 south, 1 west. They were boxing me in, pushing me east toward rougher country where the drainages got steeper and the trails disappeared. I recognized the tactic. It's what we used to do in manhunts. Control the flanks, limit the options, funnel the target into a kill zone. I made a hard choice. I turned due west, straight toward one of the signals, and started moving fast. If something was trying to herd me, I'd go through it instead of away from it. The signal got stronger. I was closing the distance. At 100 yards, I slowed and moved tree to tree, scanning ahead. At 50 yards, I stopped and crouched behind a downed log. The signal was pinging hard, right in front of me, 20 yards out. I didn't see a wolf. I saw a collar. It hung from a low branch, swaying slightly in the wind. The strap was torn. Dark stains marked the nylon. I approached slowly and looked at the tag. M1904, the young male from Dark Canyon. I scanned the ground. No wolf, no body, no tracks. Just the collar, hung deliberately at eye level like a marker. I backed away and checked the receiver. The other two signals were closing from the north and south, fast. I ran. For the next hour I didn't stop. I crashed through brush, slid down loose scree, and pushed my lungs past anything I'd done in training. I hit the fire road at 10:15 a.m. and turned north toward the lookout. My legs were cramping. My chest burned. I didn't care. The tower appeared through the trees at 11:30, a tall wooden structure with a cab at the top and a zigzag staircase wrapped around the outside. I saw smoke from a small chimney. Someone was home. I climbed the stairs two at a time and hammered on the trap door at the top. A woman's voice called down asking who it was. I gave my name and agency. She opened the hatch. Her name was Carla. She'd been manning the tower for 9 seasons and knew me from a survey I'd done 2 years prior. She took one look at my face and brought me inside without questions. The cab was small, warm, and lined with maps and radios. She poured me water and waited. I told her everything. The collars, the movements, the voice, the circling. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she nodded and picked up her landline. She called the Forest Service dispatch and gave a short report. Surveyor at Spruce Creek Tower. Possible wildlife incident. Requesting pickup and investigation. She hung up and told me a truck would be there in 90 minutes. While we waited, I checked the receiver one more time. Both remaining signals had stopped moving. They were pinging from my abandoned camp. Stationary. Together. Carla saw the reading and made a small sound in her throat. She said she'd heard stories from other lookouts about collars moving wrong, about voices in the forest that shouldn't be there. She said the old-timers had a rule. If you hear yourself talking when you know you're not, you leave the area and don't come back until winter. The truck arrived at 1 p.m. 2 Forest Service rangers and a fish and game officer I knew named Grant. We drove back toward my camp in silence. They didn't ask me to guide them in. They already knew where it was. We parked at the closest access point and hiked the last mile. My tent was still standing. The bear hang was untouched. The fire ring was cold. Everything looked normal except for the collars. All 3 of them were arranged in a triangle around my tent, each one placed carefully on the ground, facing inward. The straps were torn. The batteries were still transmitting. Grant knelt and photographed each collar without touching them. He bagged them separately and labeled the bags. One of the rangers walked a wide circle around the camp and stopped at several points to crouch and examine the ground. He called us over. Tracks. Large canine prints. But wrong. The toes were too long. The spacing was too wide. The depth was uneven, like something heavy walking on its toes to lighten its print. The tracks circled my tent 3 times and then headed north into thick timber. We followed them for 100 yards. They stopped at a game trail and disappeared. No scuff marks, no exit tracks. Just gone. Grant asked me if I'd taken anything from the forest. I said no. He asked if I'd disturbed any sites or markers. I said no. He asked if I'd seen anyone else in the area. I said no. He told me they'd recover the wolf bodies if they could find them, but that it might take time. He told me the collars would go to the lab in Albuquerque for analysis. He told me my survey was over and that I should take the rest of the week off. On the drive out, one of the rangers, an older guy named Bill, told me quietly that they'd had 3 other reports that year from surveyors and trail crews working in remote sections of the Gila. Voices that shouldn't be there, collars moving wrong, camps circled at night. He said they didn't put it in official reports because it didn't fit the format, but that everyone who worked the wilderness long enough saw something that didn't fit the world, as we're taught it works. He said the old Apache and Navajo families who lived near the wilderness boundary had stories about things that lived in the forest and learned by watching. He said they had different names for it depending on the tribe, but the behavior was always the same. It copied, it followed, it tested. He said if it ever called me by name, I should leave the forest and not return until someone else had been through the area and reset the boundary, whatever that meant. I asked him what he meant by reset the boundary. He said he didn't know the details, just that the local families had ways of clearing an area after something got too bold. He said it involved salt and smoke and walking a perimeter, but that it wasn't his knowledge to share. 3 weeks later, Grant called me at home. They'd found the wolves, all 3 of them, scattered across a 2-mile area in the high country north of my camp. They'd been killed weeks before I arrived, throats torn out, bodies dragged into cover and cached like a cat would cache prey. The wounds didn't match any known predator, too wide for a mountain lion, too precise for a bear. The bite radius was wrong. Grant also told me they'd pulled data from a trail camera set up near Turkey Creek for a separate wildlife study. The camera had captured a figure walking through frame on October 21st, 2 days before I arrived. The figure was wearing my clothes, my vest, my pack, my hat. The camera captured the figure doing my evening radio check at 6 p.m., speaking to no one, using my exact voice. It captured the figure walking my planned route, stopping at my planned camp location, and setting up a small pile of sticks in the exact spot where I would later place my tent. Grant said the footage was being held as part of an ongoing investigation, but that he wanted me to know what they'd found. He said I'd followed my instincts and made the right call to extract when I did. He said if I ever surveyed the Gila again, I should request a partner. I thanked him and hung up. I haven't been back. I still work surveys, but I stay out of the Gila and I don't take remote assignments anymore. I work shorter contracts in areas with road access and cell coverage. I carry a sidearm again. I don't camp alone. The part that stays with me isn't the collars or the voices or even the trail camera footage. It's the precision. The thing that killed those wolves and carried their collars knew my schedule before I arrived. It knew my voice. It knew my route. It had been watching survey crews long enough to learn the pattern, and it used that knowledge to get close. It didn't want to kill me. If it did, I'd be dead. It wanted to see how I'd react. It was testing me the way a predator tests prey before committing to a hunt. I think about that sometimes when I'm setting up camp, even now in places I consider safe. I think about how something could be watching from the trees, learning my routine, memorizing my voice, waiting for the right moment to step into my space and see what I'd do. The old rule Bill told me about makes sense now. If you hear yourself talking when you know you're not, leave and don't come back until winter. Cold resets things. Snow covers tracks. The forest goes quiet and forces everything to start over. I follow that rule now. I don't work remote surveys after October. I don't camp in areas where my voice could carry far enough for something to learn it. I check trail cameras before I set up camp, and if I see anything that looks like me in the footage, I pack up and move. I'm not paranoid. I'm careful. There's a difference. If you work in wilderness areas and use radios or phones for daily check-ins, change your phrasing every time. Don't repeat yourself. Don't use the same words in the same order. If something is listening and learning, make it harder. If you're tracking collared animals and the signals start moving in ways that don't make sense, don't assume equipment failure. Mark the location, leave the area, and report it to someone who can verify the data from a distance. If you hear your own voice in the forest, or the voice of someone you know who isn't there, don't investigate, don't call out, don't try to make sense of it, just leave. Walk toward roads, toward people, toward noise and light. And if you ever find collars arranged in patterns around your camp, don't touch them, don't pack them up, leave everything, and move fast toward the nearest manned station. Some things in the forest are just animals doing animal things, and some things are older and smarter and more patient than we want to believe. The trick is knowing which is which before you're too far from the trailhead to make it back. I learned that lesson in the Gila. I'm lucky I learned it in time. If you found this story unsettling in the right way, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and let me know in the comments what deep woods experiences have stuck with you over the years. More stories coming. Stay safe out there. My daughter came home from her field trip talking about the nice park ranger who knew her name. We'd never met him. I teach 4th grade in Flagstaff, and I'd been planning the Walnut Canyon field trip for 6 weeks. 22 kids, 4 parent volunteers, 2 hours of geology and ancestral Puebloan history, and a controlled hike down to the cliff dwellings. I'd done this trip 11 times in 8 years. I had the clipboard, the buddy system, the head counts, and the emergency contact list memorized. Everything went fine until the hike back up. We'd spent 40 minutes in the dwellings. The kids asked good questions. The park ranger, a woman named Sandra, gave a solid talk about the Sinagua people and how they built into the limestone alcoves for protection from weather and enemies. She showed them the handprints on the cave ceilings, the soot from cooking fires, the small windows that caught winter sun. Standard program. The kids were engaged. No one wandered off. At 2:15, we started back up the paved trail. The elevation gain is about 200 feet over a quarter-mile of switchbacks. Not terrible, but enough to wind fourth graders who'd rather be playing Fortnite. I counted heads at every turn. 22 kids, 4 adults, everyone accounted for. At the third switchback, my daughter, Emma, stopped to tie her shoe. I waited with her while the group moved ahead. She finished the knot, stood up, and said, "Mr. Hewitt said we're doing good." I looked around. The trail above and below was empty except for our group. "Who's Mr. Hewitt?" "The ranger," she said, pointing down the trail behind us. "He's been walking with us the whole time." I looked where she pointed. No one was there. Just the empty paved path curving back into the canyon. "Honey, the ranger's name is Sandra, and she's up front with Mrs. Moore." Emma gave me that look kids give when adults are being deliberately dense. "Not her. Mr. Hewitt. He has the brown hat and the green coat. He told me I'm doing a good job on the project about the Sinagua." My stomach did something cold. Emma had been working on a Sinagua research project at home for the last week, but we hadn't discussed it with anyone outside the family. I'd helped her build a model of a cliff dwelling out of clay and popsicle sticks. It sat on our kitchen table. No one at school had seen it yet. "What else did Mr. Hewitt say?" I kept my voice light. "Just that he liked my project and that I should keep going. He said the details were really good." She smiled. "He was nice." I took her hand and walked faster up the trail. At the top, I did another head count. 22 kids, 4 adults. I pulled Sandra aside and asked if there were any other rangers on the trail that day. She checked her radio and said no. It was just her and the visitor center staff. I asked if anyone named Hewitt worked at the park. She said not in the 4 years she'd been there. I didn't push it. I thanked her, loaded the kids on the bus, and drove back to school. During the drive, I watched Emma in the rearview mirror. She sat with her friend Mackenzie, laughing about something on Mackenzie's phone. Normal, happy, unworried. That night at dinner, I asked her to tell me more about Mr. Hewitt. She said he was tall, older, maybe 50, with a brown ranger hat and a green jacket that looked old and faded. She said he walked behind the group and smiled at her twice. She said he knew her name without her telling him. "Did he ask you any questions?" I asked. "Just if I liked the dwellings." I said yes. Then he said I must be good at details because my project at home was really detailed. My wife, Anne, set down her fork. "How would he know about the project?" Emma shrugged. "Maybe he looked in our window?" We live on the edge of town where the Ponderosa Forest starts. Our kitchen window faces the trees. We don't have close neighbors. I'd never thought about someone standing in the woods watching us through that window, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. After Emma went to bed, I walked outside with a flashlight and checked the tree line behind the house. Pine needles covered the ground. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing obvious. I went back inside and locked the doors. 2 days later, Emma asked if Mr. Hewitt was coming to our house. We were in the car driving home from her soccer practice. She said it casually, the way kids ask about dinner plans or weekend activities. "What do you mean coming to our house?" I tried to keep my voice even. He said he wanted to see my project in person. He said he'd stop by. I pulled into the driveway and turned to face her. "Emma, when did he say that?" "Yesterday at recess. He was by the fence." My hands went cold on the steering wheel. "What fence?" "The back fence by the forest. He was standing there watching us play." He waved at me. "Our elementary school backs up to national forest land. There's a chain link fence separating the playground from the trees, but it's not tall, and it's not monitored. Teachers watch the kids, but they don't scan the forest for adults standing in the shadows. Did you tell anyone he was there? No, he wasn't doing anything bad. He was just watching. I went inside and called the school principal. I told her everything. The field trip, the project details, the recess sighting. She said she'd review the playground camera footage and increase supervision near the back fence. She asked if I wanted to file a police report. I said I'd think about it. That night I didn't sleep. I kept getting up and checking the kitchen window. At 2 a.m. I saw a shape standing in the trees about 30 yards out. Tall, still. It didn't move for 5 minutes. Then it stepped sideways behind a thick ponderosa and disappeared. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I went to the back door and shone the beam into the forest. Nothing. Just trees and shadows, and the sound of wind moving through branches. In the morning, I called in sick and drove to the school. I sat in the parking lot and watched the back fence during morning recess. At 10:20, I saw him. He stood just inside the tree line, partially obscured by a pine trunk, wearing a brown hat and a green jacket that looked military surplus. Tall, older, he didn't move. He just watched the kids play. I got out of my car and walked toward the fence. He saw me coming and stepped back deeper into the trees. I called out, "Hey, I need to talk to you." He didn't respond. He just faded back into the forest with a smooth, deliberate motion that felt practiced. I tried to follow, but the fence stopped me. I didn't have keys to the gate and I wasn't going to climb it in front of a playground full of kids. I took a photo with my phone. The image was too dark and too far away to show anything useful, just trees and a vague shape that could have been a person or a shadow. I went to the principal's office and showed her where I'd seen him. She called the police. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. I walked them to the fence line and pointed out the area. They said they'd patrol the forest border during school hours and asked if I had any video from my home security system. I didn't have a security system. That was about to change. That afternoon, I installed 2 cameras, one covering the backyard and one covering the driveway. Motion activated, cloud storage, night vision. I set them up while Emma was still at school and tested them 3 times to make sure they worked. At 4:30, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. I opened the app and watched the footage. A man in a brown hat and green jacket walked slowly across the edge of my yard, just inside the tree line. He stopped, turned toward the house, and stared directly at the camera for 8 seconds. Then he walked back into the forest. I saved the video and sent it to the police. They said they'd send someone out. At 5:15, my phone buzzed again. Another motion alert. This time the man was closer. He stood 20 feet from the back door, partially hidden by a pine tree, watching the kitchen window. I could see his face in the frame, older, weathered, smiling slightly. He stayed there for 12 seconds. Then he stepped back into shadow and disappeared. I called Anne and told her to pick Emma up from aftercare and go to her sister's house in town. I told her not to come home until I called. She heard something in my voice and didn't argue. The police arrived at 6 p.m. I showed them the footage. They watched it twice without speaking. The older officer, a guy named Kendrick, asked if I'd ever seen this man before the field trip. I said no. He asked if I'd had any disputes with neighbors or co-workers. I said no. He asked if anyone had a reason to target my family. I said I couldn't think of any. They walked the tree line with flashlights and found a spot where pine needles had been disturbed in a rough circle, like someone had been standing in one place for a long time. No clear boot prints. No cigarette butts. No trash. Just the disturbed ground and a faint smell that Kendrick said reminded him of wet dog and something else he couldn't name. They took a report and said they'd increase patrols in the area. Kendrick gave me his card and told me to call immediately if the man came back. He also suggested I keep Emma home from school for a few days until they could figure out what was going on. I called Anne and told her it was safe to come home. I didn't tell her about the second video or the smell. I just said the police had been out and were taking it seriously. Emma asked why we were having a sleepover at Aunt Kelly's. I told her we were doing some repairs on the house and it would be easier if she wasn't there. She accepted that without question. That night I sat in the living room with the lights off and the camera app open on my phone. At 11:40, the backyard camera triggered. The man walked out of the forest and stopped 10 feet from the back door. He stood there looking at the house. His lips moved like he was talking to someone, but there was no audio on the cameras. After 30 seconds, he walked to the kitchen window and pressed his face against the glass. I was standing on the other side of that window in the dark living room. We were 15 feet apart. I could see his eyes, pale, steady, focused. He stayed there for a full minute. Then he reached up and tapped the glass 3 times with his knuckle. Slow, deliberate. The sound was clear even from where I stood. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched him watch me through the glass. After the 3rd tap, he stepped back and walked toward the forest. Halfway there, he stopped and turned around. He tilted his head and said something I couldn't hear. Then he walked into the trees and disappeared. I checked the camera footage. His lips had moved clearly in the frame. I watched it 4 times, trying to read what he said. It looked like "See you Monday." Monday was 3 days away. That's when Emma would be back at school. I called Kendrick at midnight and told him what happened. He said he'd send a unit out immediately. 2 officers arrived at 12:30 and searched the property with thermal imaging. They found nothing. No heat signatures in the forest. No tracks. No sign anyone had been there except for the video footage. They stayed until 2 a.m. and then left with a promise to patrol every hour through the night. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat across my lap and watched the cameras. Nothing moved until dawn. In the morning, I called the school and told them Emma wouldn't be returning until further notice. I said we were dealing with a family emergency. They didn't push for details. Anne asked what was really going on. I showed her the videos. All of them. She watched in silence and then asked what we should do. I said we should leave, pack up for a week and stay with her sister. Let the police do their job. Let this guy get bored and move on. She agreed. We packed that afternoon and drove to Kelly's house in town. Emma thought it was a vacation. We let her think that. For 3 days, nothing happened. No alerts. No sightings. Kendrick called twice to update me. They'd run the video through facial recognition. No hits. They'd searched the national forest behind our property. No camps. No signs of anyone living rough. They'd interviewed neighbors and school staff. No one had seen anyone matching the description. On the 4th day, Emma asked when we were going home. I told her soon. She said she missed her project. She wanted to finish the details. That night, I got a motion alert from the driveway camera. I opened the app expecting to see a deer or a stray dog. Instead, I saw the man in the brown hat standing next to my car. He was holding something. I zoomed in on the frame. It was Emma's clay and popsicle stick model of the cliff dwelling, the one that had been sitting on our kitchen table. He'd been inside our house. I called 911 and told them someone had broken into my home. They dispatched units immediately. I called Kendrick separately and told him to check the video feed. Officers arrived at the property within 8 minutes. They found the back door unlocked and slightly open. No signs of forced entry. They cleared the house room by room. No one inside. Nothing disturbed except the kitchen table. The model was gone. They found it in the backyard, sitting carefully on a stump at the edge of the forest. Undamaged. Placed deliberately like an offering. Next to it was a note written on a torn piece of paper bag. The handwriting was neat and precise. Details matter. Tell Emma she's very talented. Mr. Hewitt. Kendrick bagged the note and the model as evidence. He told me not to return to the house until they'd processed everything. He said they were treating this as an active stalking case and would coordinate with the Forest Service to search the wilderness areas near my property. I asked him what he really thought was going on. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that in his 20 years of law enforcement he'd worked cases that didn't fit normal patterns. Cases where the suspect knew things they shouldn't know and moved in ways that didn't make tactical sense. He said most of those cases went cold because the evidence stopped making sense the deeper you dug. He said there were old stories around Flagstaff about things in the forest that watched people and learned their routines. He said his grandmother, who was Hopi, told him never to let a stranger know your name or your habits because some things could use that information in ways that gave them power. He said he didn't know if that was superstition or wisdom, but that in this case the man in the brown hat knew things he shouldn't know and was moving in ways that suggested he'd been watching my family for longer than just a week. He told me to consider relocating for a while, not just to Kelly's house, somewhere farther, somewhere this man wouldn't think to look. We left Arizona 2 days later. Anne's parents live in New Mexico near Albuquerque. We told Emma we were taking an extended visit. We enrolled her in a temporary school and settled into a guest room arrangement that felt permanent, even though we kept calling it temporary. Kendrick called me once a week with updates. They'd found a makeshift shelter in the forest, about a mile from my house. Old tarp, fire ring, trash buried in a shallow pit, no identification. No personal items, just evidence someone had been living there and watching. They'd also found 3 more notes tucked into tree bark near the shelter, all addressed to Emma, all complimenting her work, all signed Mr. Hewitt. They never found him. The case is still open. The shelter was abandoned sometime in the week after we left. Kendrick said whoever it was had probably moved on to another area or another family. We sold the house in Flagstaff without ever living in it again. Anne got a teaching job in Albuquerque. Emma adjusted to her new school. We don't talk about Mr. Hewitt anymore, but sometimes Emma asks why we moved. I tell her we wanted a change. She accepts that, but I can see in her eyes that she remembers the man at the fence and the field trip and the way he knew her name. I think about him too. Not every day, but often enough. I think about how he knew about the project before anyone outside our family had seen it. I think about how he appeared at the school and the house without leaving tracks or making noise. I think about how he moved through the forest like he was part of it. And I think about the last thing Kendrick told me before we stopped talking regularly. He said the Forest Service found something near the shelter that didn't make it into the official report. A pile of photographs. All of Emma. Taken from a distance, taken through windows, taken at school, taken at soccer practice. All of them dated. The earliest one was from 6 months before the field trip. He'd been watching her long before we knew he existed. I don't let Emma play outside alone anymore. I don't let her walk to friends' houses. I check her school's perimeter every morning before drop-off. I installed cameras at the new house. I vary our routine so no one can learn our patterns. Anne thinks I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. But I remember the way he pressed his face to the glass and looked at me in the dark. I remember the way he moved through the forest without sound. I remember the note. Details matter. He was right. They do. And the detail that matters most is that some people don't stop watching just because you leave. Some people are patient. Some people wait. I don't know if Mr. Hewitt was a person or something else. Kendrick never said it out loud, but I could tell he had doubts. The way the case unfolded, the way evidence appeared and disappeared, the way the man seemed to know things he couldn't possibly know. Kendrick's grandmother had a word for it. Yi Nald Lushi, a person who walks in the skin of animals, a witch, something that learns by watching and uses that knowledge to get close. I don't know if I believe that. But I know that belief doesn't matter when you're standing in your living room in the dark watching someone watch you through your kitchen window. What matters is that you trust your gut when something feels wrong. What matters is that you don't wait for proof before you act. What matters is that you protect your family even if it means leaving everything behind. We're safe now, or at least safer. Emma's growing up in a new place with new friends and new routines. She doesn't talk about Mr. Hewitt. She doesn't ask about the old house. She's moving forward. But sometimes at night when I check the cameras, I see shadows in the tree line that don't move like trees. And sometimes I wonder if we really left him behind, or if he's still out there, watching, learning, waiting for us to let our guard down. I don't think he's done. I think he's just patient. And that's the worst part. Not knowing if it's over. Not knowing if the man in the brown hat is still out there in some other forest watching some other family. not knowing if one day I'll get a call from Kendrick saying they found him, or worse, that they found another family he got close to. I hope not. I hope he moved on to empty wilderness where there's no one to watch. I hope he got tired or old or careless and disappeared the way people do when the forest takes them back. But I don't count on hope. I count on cameras and locks and varied routines and hypervigilance. I count on keeping Emma close and keeping our patterns unpredictable. And I count on the one thing Kendrick told me that actually helps me sleep at night. He said that whatever Mr. Hewitt was, he never touched Emma, never got within arm's reach, never tried to take her. He just watched and waited and tested boundaries. Kendrick said that suggests rules, limits, a line he wouldn't or couldn't cross. Maybe he needed permission. Maybe he needed invitation. Maybe he needed us to drop our guard completely before he could act. We never gave him that. We moved too fast. We broke the pattern. We left before he was ready. So if you're reading this, and you have kids, and you live near the forest, pay attention to the people who know things they shouldn't know. Pay attention to the strangers who show up at field trips and fences and windows. Pay attention to the way your gut tightens when someone watches a little too long. Don't wait for proof. Don't wait for an explanation. Don't wait for the police to tell you it's serious enough to act. Just move. Change your routine. Vary your patterns. Make yourself a harder target. Because some people are patient. Some people are learning. And some people will wait as long as it takes if you give them the chance. Don't give them the chance. I've been driving logging roads in northern Idaho for 15 years, and I've learned that when someone waves at you from the side of the road at 2 a.m, you don't wave back. I haul timber for Clearwater Forest Products out of Pierce. Night shifts pay better and the roads are empty, which suits me fine. I know every spur, every switchback, and every pull-off between Pierce and the Canadian border. I've driven in whiteouts, ice storms, and fog so thick I couldn't see my own hood. I've seen elk herds crossing at dawn, caught wolves in my headlights, and watched northern lights turn the sky green over the Bitterroot Range. I thought I'd seen everything the forest could show me. I was wrong. It started in late September on a routine run from a cut block near Elk City down to the mill in Lewiston. I'd loaded 26 tons of ponderosa pine at the landing, secured the chains, and headed out at 11 p.m. The plan was simple. Take Forest Road 360 to Highway 14, then south through Grangeville to Lewiston. 4 hours if the road stayed clear, 5 if I hit weather. The first hour was clean. Cool air, clear sky, no traffic. I had the radio on low, playing old Johnny Cash, and the heater set just warm enough to keep the windows from fogging. The load rode smooth. The engine sounded good. Everything felt normal. At mile marker 40 on FR 360, I saw the first one. A man standing on the shoulder in the dark, arm raised in a wave. He wore jeans and a light-colored jacket. No reflective gear. No vest, no flashlight. Just standing there in the middle of nowhere at midnight waving at passing trucks. I didn't slow down. You don't stop on remote forest roads at night for strangers. That's how people get robbed or worse. I kept my speed and passed him without acknowledging the wave. In my side mirror, I watched him drop his arm and turn to watch me go. He didn't move otherwise, just stood there tracking my trailer lights until the curve took him out of view. I thought about it for the next 10 miles. There's no reason for someone to be standing on that stretch of road at that hour. No trailheads, no campsites, no broken down vehicles. The nearest town was 20 miles back and the next one was 30 miles ahead. Cell service doesn't exist out there. If his car had died, he'd be better off staying with it than wandering in the dark. I radioed dispatch to report a possible stranded motorist at mile 40. They logged it and said they'd notify the county. I kept driving. At mile 55, I saw the second one. Same man, same jacket, same wave, standing on the shoulder in the exact same posture with his arm raised like he'd been waiting for me specifically. That got my attention. There's no way someone could cover 15 miles of mountain road in the time it took me to drive it, especially not on foot in the dark. I slowed to 30 and hit my high beams. The man didn't react to the light. He just stood there with his arm up, watching me approach. As I passed, I got a better look. The jacket was tan. The jeans were dark. His face was neutral, not smiling, not distressed. His arm stayed up in the wave position like it was locked there. His eyes tracked my cab as I went by. In the mirror, I watched him again. Same as before. Arm dropped. Body turned. Eyes following my lights until the road curved away. I got on the radio and told dispatch I'd seen the same man twice in 15 miles. I gave them both locations. The dispatcher, a woman named Ruth who'd been doing this job longer than I'd been driving, went quiet for a few seconds before responding. "Kyle, you said the same man, same jacket, same posture, same wave. I'm not saying it's impossible he got ahead of me, but I don't see how. You want me to call county?" "Yeah, something's off." She said she'd make the call and told me to check in at the highway junction. I said I would. At mile 70, I saw him again. This time I was ready. I grabbed my phone and tried to take a picture as I passed. The camera focused on the darkness and the flash bleached everything white. When I checked the photo, it showed only an empty shoulder and trees. But I'd seen him. Same man, same wave, same empty expression. I radioed Ruth immediately. "He's at mile 70 now. That's 3 times. Same guy." Her voice came back tight and professional. "Kyle, I need you to stay on the line with me until you hit the highway. Don't stop. Don't acknowledge him if you see him again. Just drive." "What's going on, Ruth?" "We've had reports before. Not often, but enough. Just stay on the line and keep moving." I didn't like the way she said that, but I kept the radio keyed and kept driving. Ruth stayed quiet on her end, just listening to my engine and my breathing. At mile 85, he was there again. Same position, same wave. This time I noticed his boots. They were clean. No mud, no dust, no wear marks. The road was dirt and gravel, and he'd supposedly been walking it for hours, but his boots looked like they'd just come out of a box. "Ruth, his boots are clean. Don't stop, Kyle." "I'm not stopping. I'm just saying it doesn't make sense." "I know. Keep driving." At mile 92, I hit a straight section with good visibility for about a mile. I could see the road ahead lit up by my headlights. Empty. No one there. I relaxed slightly and reached for my coffee. By the time I brought the cup to my lips, I was at mile 93, and he was there again. Impossible. I'd been watching the road. He hadn't walked into position. He'd just appeared. This time when I passed, he did something different. He dropped his arm and stepped into the road behind my trailer. Not in front. Behind. Like he was trying to follow. I watched in the mirror as he walked down the center line behind me, matching my speed for about 5 seconds. Then he stopped, turned, and stepped off the shoulder back into the trees. Gone. Ruth. He just walked into the road behind me. How far to the highway? I checked my GPS. 11 miles. "You're almost out. Stay with me." The next 2 miles were empty. No man. No wave. Just dark forest and gravel road. I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe he'd given up or gotten bored or whatever it is that makes people do strange things in the woods at night. At mile 98, he was standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes and the load lurched forward against the chains. The truck shuddered and slowed. I stopped about 30 feet from him. My headlights lit him up clearly. Same jacket, same jeans. Same clean boots. But this time his arm wasn't raised in a wave. Both arms hung at his sides. His head was tilted slightly to the right, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Ruth, he's blocking the road. Do not get out of the truck." "I'm not, but I can't drive through him." "Yes, you can. Hit the horn and go." I laid on the horn. The sound echoed through the canyon. The man didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react at all. I put the truck in gear and started rolling forward slowly, 5 miles an hour. The man stood still. At 10 feet away, I could see his face clearly, pale, expressionless. Eyes open but not focused on anything. He looked like a mannequin someone had dressed and posed. At 5 feet, I stopped again. Something in me wouldn't let me hit him even though every instinct said he wasn't human. Kyle, what are you doing? I can't run him over, Ruth. You're not running over a person. Trust me. Go. I pressed the accelerator and the truck moved forward. The man didn't step aside. The bumper got within a foot of him and he just dissolved. That's the only word for it. He didn't jump away or fall or run. He came apart like smoke and drifted into the trees on both sides of the road. I drove through the space where he'd been and kept going. My hands were shaking on the wheel. Ruth, he disappeared. I know. Keep going. You're almost there. At mile 102, I saw the glow of the highway junction, pavement, streetlights, a gas station that stayed open all night. I'd never been so happy to see fluorescent lights in my life. I pulled into the station lot and parked under the brightest light I could find. I sat there for 5 minutes with the engine running and the doors locked, just breathing. Ruth came back on the radio. You at the junction? Yeah. You all right? I don't know what I just saw. I know. County's sending someone to meet you. Stay at the station until they get there. A sheriff's deputy arrived 20 minutes later. His name was Haynes, and he looked tired in the way cops look when they've worked too many night shifts. He took my statement in the gas station parking lot while I drank bad coffee and tried to explain what had happened. He wrote it all down without interrupting. When I finished, he asked if I'd been drinking or using any substances. I said no. He asked if I had any history of seizures or hallucinations. I said no. He asked if I'd been awake for more than 24 hours. I said no. I'd slept that afternoon before my shift. Then he closed his notebook and told me he believed me. He said they got reports 3 or 4 times a year from drivers on that stretch of FR 360, always the same description, a man in a tan jacket waving from the shoulder, always at night. Always between mile 40 and mile 100, always appearing multiple times in locations that made no logistical sense. He said no one had ever stopped to help the man and no one had ever gotten hurt, but that every driver who'd seen him reported the same details. The clean boots, the neutral expression, the way he appeared in the road and dissolved when approached. Haynes said the Forest Service had installed game cameras along that stretch trying to catch footage. The cameras showed nothing, no man, no movement, just empty road at the exact times drivers reported seeing him. He said the Nez Perce tribe had stories about that area, something about a person who got lost in the woods and died waiting for help that never came. The stories said his spirit still stood at the roadside trying to flag down travelers, but that he wasn't looking for rescue anymore. He was looking for company, looking for someone to acknowledge him, looking for someone to wave back. Haynes said the old-timers in Pierce and Elk City had a rule. If you see someone waving at you on FR 360 after dark, don't wave back, don't stop, don't acknowledge them at all, because once you do, they'll start following you home. He said there'd been one case, about 8 years back, where a driver had stopped to help. The driver said the man got in the passenger seat and sat there silently for 20 miles before dissolving into nothing. After that night, the driver reported seeing the man in other places, at his house, at the mill, standing in his backyard. The driver moved out of state 6 months later and wouldn't talk about it. Haynes asked if I'd waved or stopped at any point. I said I'd braked once when the man stood in the road, but I hadn't waved and I hadn't gotten out. He nodded and said I'd probably be fine then. Probably. I asked him what he meant by probably. He said that sometimes the man followed people anyway, even if they didn't acknowledge him. Not often, but sometimes. He said if I started seeing the man in places other than FR 360, I should call him immediately. He gave me his card. I drove the rest of the way to Lewiston without incident, unloaded at the mill, drove home to my apartment in Pierce, slept badly, woke up tired. That night I went back to work. Dispatch tried to route me on FR 360 again and I refused. I said I'd take the long way through headquarters even if it added an hour. Ruth didn't push. She just rerouted me without comment. For 2 weeks I avoided FR 360 completely. I took every alternate route I could find, even the bad ones with steep grades and tight turns. I didn't care if it cost me time or fuel. I wasn't going back to that road. On week 3, dispatch called me at home. They said another driver had seen the man again, 3 times between mile 40 and mile 70. Same description, same wave. The driver had panicked and driven off the road into a ditch. The truck was totaled, but the driver was fine. The company wanted someone experienced to drive the route and verify conditions. They asked if I'd do it. I said no. They offered hazard pay. I still said no. That night the man appeared in my living room. I'd gotten home from a run to Coeur d'Alene around midnight. I was tired but wired in the way you get after hours of night driving, so I made a sandwich and turned on the TV. I was halfway through a rerun of Law and Order when I saw him in my peripheral vision. He stood by the kitchen doorway, same tan jacket, same jeans, same clean boots, arm raised in a wave. I dropped my sandwich and stood up. He didn't move. He just stood there watching me with that neutral expression. "You're not real," I said. He didn't respond. I grabbed my phone and called Haynes. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "It's Kyle, the driver from FR 360. He's in my house." Haynes didn't ask questions. He just said he'd be there in 10 minutes and told me to stay on the line. I kept the phone to my ear and watched the man. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't lower his arm, just stood there like a statue. After a minute, I started moving sideways toward the front door. The man's head turned to follow me, but his body stayed facing forward. His neck rotated further than it should have, past 90 degrees, until his face tracked me all the way to the door. I opened the door and stepped outside. The man stayed in my apartment. I watched him through the window. He lowered his arm slowly and stepped back into the kitchen, out of sight. Haynes arrived with another deputy. They went into my apartment with flashlights and cleared every room. No one there, no signs of entry, no broken locks or windows. They checked my kitchen doorway where the man had stood. Nothing. Haynes asked if anything was missing or disturbed. I walked through and checked. Everything was where I'd left it. He told me what I already knew, that I'd acknowledged the man by breaking, that I'd looked at him too long, that I'd given him enough attention to create a connection. He said it would probably get worse before it got better. More sightings, more appearances. The man would show up in familiar places, trying to integrate himself into my routine, trying to become normal. Haynes said there were 2 ways it usually ended. Either the person moved far away and broke the pattern completely, or they learned to ignore the sightings until the man gave up and stopped appearing. He said moving was more effective, but ignoring could work if I was stubborn enough. I asked how long it would take if I ignored him. Haynes said it varied. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months. One guy reported sightings for almost a year before they stopped. I didn't want to move. I'd lived in Pierce for 12 years. I had a good job, a decent apartment, and a routine I liked. I wasn't going to let some ghost or hallucination or whatever it was run me out of town. I decided to ignore it. The man appeared 6 more times over the next month. Once at the grocery store, standing in the produce section. Once at the gas station by the diesel pumps. Once in the mill parking lot by my truck. Once on the sidewalk outside the diner where I ate lunch. Each time I looked past him like he wasn't there. I didn't acknowledge him, didn't react, just went about my business. It was harder than it sounds. Every instinct wants you to look, to verify what you're seeing, to confirm the impossibility of it. But I'd learned from Ruth and Haynes that attention was what it wanted, so I starved it. After 6 weeks, the sightings slowed. 1 every 10 days, then 1 every 2 weeks, then nothing for a month. I thought it was over. I started taking FR 360 again. Dispatch was happy. The route was faster, and the road had been graded since the last incident. I made it 3 runs without seeing anything. On the 4th run, at mile 70, he was there again. Same spot, same wave. I didn't brake. I didn't slow down. I looked straight ahead and drove past like the shoulder was empty. In my mirror, I saw him lower his arm. He turned and walked into the forest. That was the last time I saw him. That was 4 years ago. I still drive FR 360 regularly. I've never seen the man again, but I hear reports from other drivers every few months, new guys mostly, who don't know the stories. They see him waving and some of them stop. Some of them wave back. I tell them what Haynes told me. Don't acknowledge, don't engage, don't feed it attention. Most of them listen. A few don't. Those are the ones who call me later asking if I've ever seen a man in a tan jacket standing in strange places. I tell them yes. I tell them what to do. I tell them it will stop if they're patient. Most of the time it does, but not always. There's one driver, a younger guy named Travis, who started seeing the man 2 years ago. He waved back. He stopped to offer help. He let the man sit in his truck for 5 miles before it disappeared. Travis still sees him every week, sometimes every day. The man shows up at his house, his girlfriend's place, his parents' property in Orofino. Travis has tried ignoring him, tried moving, tried everything Haynes suggested. Nothing works. The man is still there, still waving, still waiting. Travis doesn't drive nights anymore, can't handle the stress. He works warehouse shifts at the mill and lives with his mom. He's 32 years old and afraid to be alone in the dark. I think about that sometimes when I'm driving FR 360 late at night. I think about how a simple gesture, a reflexive wave at a stranger, can open a door you can't close. I think about how something can look human and act human and stand where humans stand, but not be human at all. I think about the clean boots and the neutral expression and the way the man dissolved into smoke when I drove through him. And I think about the rule the old-timers taught and the rule I follow now. If someone waves at you from the side of a remote forest road in the middle of the night, don't wave back. Don't stop. Don't acknowledge them at all. Because some things are standing there waiting for permission, waiting for recognition, waiting for you to confirm that you see them. And once you do, they see you too. I've been driving these roads long enough to know that not everything standing on the shoulder is looking for help. Some things are looking for connection. Some things are looking for a way in. The wave is an invitation. The question is whether you're going to accept it. I learned to say no. I hope you do too. Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life seeing a man in a tan jacket standing in places he shouldn't be, waving at you like an old friend, waiting patiently for you to wave back. And eventually, when you're tired enough, or scared enough, or worn down enough, you will. That's when it stops being a haunting and becomes something else, something permanent. Don't let it get that far. Don't wave back. My hunting camera caught something walking past my stand at 3 in the morning, and it was wearing the jacket I had on. I hunt whitetail on family land in northern Wisconsin, about 40 minutes west of Rhinelander, 200 acres of mixed hardwood and pine that's been in our family since the 1950s. My grandfather built a small cabin on the property back when land was cheap and deer were everywhere. Now it's just me who uses it regularly. My brother comes up for opening weekend and my dad makes an appearance once a season, but the rest of the year it's mine. I'm methodical about hunting. I scout in September, set stands in early October, run trail cameras year-round, and keep detailed logs of deer movement, weather patterns, and moon phases. I'm not one of those guys who shows up opening morning hoping for luck. I put in the work. I know where the deer bed, where they feed, and where they travel between the two. This year I'd placed 6 cameras across the property, 3 on primary trails, 2 on scrape lines, and 1 overlooking a small clearing where I'd seen a big 8-point during summer scouting. The camera at the clearing was my best setup, positioned 12 feet up a white oak with a clear view of a travel corridor that funneled deer from bedding cover to an oak flat. I check the cameras every 2 weeks like clockwork, pull the SD cards, review the footage at the cabin, replace batteries, reposition if needed. It's part of the routine I've built over 15 years of hunting this land. On October 9th, I pulled the card from the clearing camera. It had been out for 16 days and the battery indicator showed 70%. Good placement, no issues. I took the card back to the cabin and loaded it into my laptop while I made coffee. The camera had captured 237 images, Mostly doe and fawns moving through at dawn and dusk, a few coyotes, one bobcat. And at frame 183, something that made me rewind the footage 3 times to make sure I was seeing it right. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. on October 7th. A figure walked through frame from left to right, moving at a normal human pace. It wore jeans, boots, and a blaze orange jacket identical to the one I'd been wearing 2 days earlier when I'd been on the property checking stands. The figure's face was angled away from the camera, but the build was right. Same height, same frame. The gait looked like mine, that slight favor of the right leg from an old knee injury. But I hadn't been on the property at 3:47 a.m. on October 7th. I'd been home in Wausau, asleep in my bed, because I work construction and I'm on site by 6:30 every morning. There's no way I could have been in the woods at that hour. I checked the timestamp against my phone's location history, confirmed I was home. Whoever or whatever the camera caught wasn't me, but it was dressed like me and moved like me. I looked at the frames before and after. Nothing. Just the figure walking through and disappearing into the trees. No deer, no reaction from any wildlife. Just the figure passing through like it owned the place. I called my brother, asked if he'd been on the property recently. He said no, not since August. I asked if he'd loaned anyone his key to the gate. He said no. I asked if Dad had been up. He said Dad was in Florida visiting our aunt and wouldn't be back until November. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just said I'd noticed some fresh tracks and wanted to make sure it wasn't family. He said it wasn't and asked if I thought we had trespassers. I said maybe and that I'd keep an eye on it. After I hung up, I went back through the rest of the footage, frame by frame. At 4:12 a.m., the same figure walked back through, going the opposite direction. This time it stopped in the middle of the clearing and looked directly at the camera. The face was wrong. Same general structure as mine, same beard length, but the proportions were off. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too wide. It looked like someone had tried to copy my face from memory and gotten most of it right, but missed the details that make a face human. The figure stood there for 8 seconds. Then it raised one hand in a slow wave and walked off frame. I felt cold air move through the cabin even though the windows were closed. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time thinking about what I'd just seen. There are stories in northern Wisconsin about things in the woods that aren't what they appear to be. Old Ojibwe stories about Wendigo and Skinwalkers and spirits that take the shape of people to lure hunters deeper into the forest. My grandfather used to tell them when I was young, but I always figured they were just campfire tales meant to keep kids from wandering off. Now I wasn't sure. I decided to go back to the clearing and check for tracks. If someone was messing with me, I'd find boot prints. If it was a glitch in the camera, I'd find nothing. Either way, I needed to know. I drove out that afternoon with my rifle and a pack. The property is gated and posted. You have to drive a 1/4 mile of 2-track through dense woods to reach the cabin, and from there it's another 1/2 mile hike to the clearing. I know every turn and landmark. I've walked this land in the dark more times than I can count. The clearing looked normal, leaf litter undisturbed except for deer tracks and one set of my own boot prints from when I'd hung the camera 2 weeks earlier. I walked a grid pattern looking for anything out of place. No fresh prints, no disturbed ground, no cigarette butts or trash. I checked the camera, still mounted securely 12 feet up the oak. Battery good, no tampering. I pulled the card again and checked the recent files. Nothing new since that morning when I'd pulled it the first time. I was about to leave when I noticed something carved into the oak trunk about chest height. Fresh cuts, still weeping sap. Letters scratched into the bark with a knife or sharp stick. It was my name, Kyle, spelled correctly in neat block letters. My hands went cold. I looked around the clearing, scanning the tree line for movement. Nothing. Just wind through branches and the distant sound of a pileated woodpecker hammering dead wood. I took a photo of the carving and left. Didn't run, didn't panic, just walked back to my truck at a steady, controlled pace while checking over my shoulder every 30 yards. At the cabin, I loaded the new card into my laptop. Same footage I'd seen that morning. Nothing new. I checked the timestamp on the carving photo. 2:47 p.m. Daylight. Plenty of visibility. Nothing threatening in the immediate moment. But someone or something had carved my name into that tree between the time the camera captured the figure and the time I showed up, and they'd done it in a way that left no tracks. I called the Oneida County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak to someone about a trespassing issue. They transferred me to a deputy named Kowalski, who took my information and said he'd send someone out to take a report. Deputy Kowalski arrived at the cabin 90 minutes later. He was older, maybe late 50s, with the kind of weathered face you get from decades of outdoor work. He listened to my story without interrupting, looked at the camera footage on my laptop, and asked to see the tree. We hiked to the clearing together. He examined the carving, took photos, and walked the same grid pattern I'd walked earlier. He found the same nothing I'd found. No tracks, no evidence of anyone being there except the carving itself. He asked if I had any disputes with neighbors or family members. I said no. He asked if I'd had any threats or confrontations recently. I said no. He asked if I did anything that might make someone target me specifically. I said I kept to myself and lived pretty quietly. Kowalski nodded and looked at the tree again. He said he'd seen similar cases over the years. Hunters on remote properties reporting strange occurrences, carvings, cameras moved, stands tampered with, sounds in the dark that didn't match any animal they knew. He said most of the time it was just kids or rival hunters trying to spook someone off good land, but sometimes the cases had details that didn't fit that explanation. He said the thing about my case that bothered him was the figure in the footage. He said it looked like me but moved wrong. He couldn't put his finger on exactly what was wrong about it, but something in the way it stopped and waved felt practiced, like it was performing an action it had watched someone else do. He asked if I'd be willing to let him take the SD card as evidence. I said yes. He bagged it and labeled it with a case number. He told me to call immediately if I saw anything else unusual and to consider installing more cameras with overlapping coverage. He also suggested, almost casually, that I might want to avoid the property at night for a while, just until they figured out who was behind it. He said it in a way that made me think he didn't believe it was a who at all. After he left, I locked up the cabin and drove home. I didn't hunt that weekend. I told myself I was giving the deputies time to investigate, but really I was putting distance between myself and whatever I'd seen in that footage. For 2 weeks I stayed away. I checked my phone constantly for updates from Kowalski but heard nothing. I called the department twice and got transferred to voicemail both times. On October 23rd, I got a text from my brother. "Did you change the lock on the cabin?" I called him immediately. He said he'd driven up that morning to do some pre-season scouting and his key didn't work. The lock looked new. Different brand, different keyway. He asked if I'd changed it without telling him. I said I hadn't touched the lock. I asked if he'd tried the windows or looked inside. He said he'd walked the perimeter, but everything was buttoned up tight. He said my truck wasn't there, so he figured I'd done maintenance and forgot to tell him about the new lock. I told him I hadn't been to the property in 2 weeks, and that I definitely hadn't changed the lock. He went quiet on the line. Then he said he'd found something weird at the clearing. My camera was gone. The oak tree where I'd mounted it had fresh tool marks where someone had climbed up and removed the entire mount, and carved into the bark where the camera had been was another message. "Thanks for the footage." My brother took a photo and sent it to me. The letters were the same neat block style as before. Fresh sap. Recent work. I called Kowalski. This time he answered. I told him about the lock and the camera and the new carving. He said he'd drive out there tomorrow and check it. He also said the lab had reviewed my SD card and found something interesting. The footage showed the figure walking through the clearing, but when they analyzed the audio track there was no sound, no footsteps, no brush movement, no breathing, just silence. Like the figure had been edited into the video, except the metadata showed no signs of tampering. Kowalski said he'd seen something similar once before, about 10 years ago. A hunter near Minocqua reported a figure on his trail cam that looked like him. Same clothes, same build. The hunter confronted it one night in his stand, and the figure had spoken to him using his own voice, Said things only the hunter would know. Private things, family things. The hunter shot at it. The figure disappeared. No blood, no body, just gone. The hunter never went back to his land, sold the property at a loss and moved downstate. Kowalski said he'd gone to interview the guy afterward and the man wouldn't talk about it beyond saying he'd seen something that wasn't human wearing his face. Kowalski told me he wasn't trying to scare me, but that I should consider whether the property was worth the risk. He said some things don't want you dead, they just want you gone, and fighting them is a good way to make a bad situation worse. I thanked him and hung up. Then I drove to the property. I got there just before sunset. The new lock was exactly as my brother described, different brand, installed recently. I didn't have bolt cutters, so I couldn't get through the gate. I parked and walked around the fence line to access the cabin from the back. The cabin was locked tight, windows secure, nothing disturbed from the outside. I circled back to the clearing on foot, moving quietly through the woods with my rifle loaded and my finger off the trigger but ready. The clearing was empty. The oak tree showed the fresh marks where my camera had been removed. The new carving was clear in the fading light. I took photos from multiple angles and checked the area for any sign of who'd been there. Nothing. No boot prints. No broken branches. No vehicle tracks on any of the 2 tracks leading in. Whoever had changed the lock and removed the camera had done it without leaving evidence. I was about to leave when I heard something in the trees behind me. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving closer. I turned and raised my rifle. A figure stepped out from behind a thick pine about 40 yards away. It wore my blaze orange jacket and my boots and my hat. It stood there watching me with that wrong face, the eyes too far apart, the mouth too wide. "You need to leave," I said. My voice sounded thin in the cold air. The figure tilted its head, then it spoke in my voice. "This is my land." Same cadence, same accent. The way I dropped the G on words ending in T in Jing. It was perfect except for the fact that I was the one who should be saying it. "It's not," I said, "and you're not me." The figure smiled. The expression didn't reach its eyes. "I know what you know. I walk where you walk. I am you in every way that matters." I kept the rifle up. "Then you know I'm going to shoot you if you don't leave." It took a step closer. "You won't. You're curious. You want to understand what I am." It was right. Part of me did want to know, wanted to understand how something could copy me so completely, but a bigger part of me knew that understanding wasn't worth what it might cost. "Stay back," I said. It took another step. "I've been watching you for years. Every time you come here, every time you sit in your stand waiting for deer that won't come, every time you check your cameras and walk your trails, I learned you." My finger moved to the trigger. "Last warning." The figure stopped. It looked at me with something that might have been disappointment. "I just want to hunt. Same as you. Same land. Same deer. We can share it." "No." It tilted its head again. "Then I'll wait. You'll come back. You always do." It stepped backward into the shadows. I kept the rifle up and swept the tree line but saw nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the wind and the last light filtering through branches. I walked back to my truck without turning my back on the woods. Got in. Locked the doors. Drove out with my high beams on and my rifle across the passenger seat. I didn't go back. I called Kowalski the next morning and told him everything. He listened in silence. When I finished, he said he'd get a locksmith out to the property to change the lock back and that I should bill the county for it. He also said he'd have deputies increase patrols in the area, but he also said, very carefully, that he couldn't protect me from something that didn't leave evidence and didn't follow normal patterns. He said if I wanted to stay away from the property for a while, no one would think less of me. I took his advice. I didn't hunt that season, told people I was too busy with work. My brother asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just needed a break. The property sat empty through hunting season and into winter. In January, I got a call from a real estate agent asking if the land was for sale. I asked who told them to call me. They said they'd gotten a referral from someone who'd seen the property and thought I might be interested in selling. I asked who the referrer was. They said they didn't have a name, just a note that said the owner might be ready to move on. I hung up. In March, I drove out to the property with a friend who'd offered to help me clear some trails. We parked at the gate and I used the new key the locksmith had given me. The lock had been changed again. Different brand. Same story. We cut the lock and drove in. The cabin was secure but showed signs someone had been there. Fresh boot prints in the dust. A coffee cup on the table that I'd never seen before. The wood stove had been used recently. Ash still soft in the firebox. My friend asked if I'd rented the place out. I said no. He looked uneasy and suggested we leave. I agreed. We drove back to town and I called a real estate agent. Listed the property that week. Didn't go back to clean it out. Just left everything as it was and sold it as is to a developer from Illinois who wanted to turn it into a vacation rental. The sale closed in May. I signed the papers at a title company in Wausau and never drove past the property again. My brother asked why I'd sold. I told him I didn't have time to maintain it anymore. He accepted that, but I could tell he knew there was more to it. He'd seen the carvings. He'd heard me talk to Kowalski. He knew something had happened even if I wouldn't say exactly what. 2 years later, I ran into Kowalski at a gas station in Rhinelander. He asked how I'd been. I said good. He asked if I'd heard about the property. I said no. He told me the developer had hired a property manager to maintain the cabin and rent it to hunters. The manager lasted 3 weeks before quitting. Said he kept seeing someone on the trail cameras wearing hunter orange and walking the property at night. Said the figure looked like the owner, but the owner was never there. They hired another manager. Same thing. He lasted a month and quit without explanation. The developer tried renting it directly online, but guests kept leaving early, saying they heard footsteps outside the cabin at night and voices that sounded like them calling from the woods. Kowalski said the property had been sitting vacant for the last 6 months. No renters, no takers. The developer was trying to sell but couldn't get interest even at a significant loss. He said the Oneida County Sheriff's Office had a standing note in their files about the property. Not an official warning, just a note that deputies should be aware of unusual reports from that location. He asked if I ever thought about what I'd seen that night in the clearing. I said sometimes. He asked if I believed it was human. I said no. He nodded. Me neither. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, then went our separate ways. I haven't heard from him since. I don't hunt anymore, not on land I own or lease. I tried public land once and couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every snap of a branch felt deliberate. Every movement in the trees felt coordinated. I sold my trail cameras, sold my stands, kept the rifle because it's practical to own one in Wisconsin, but I haven't loaded it since that night in the clearing. Sometimes I think about the figure and what it said, that it had been watching me for years, that it learned me. I think about all the times I'd been on the property alone, confident in my solitude, not knowing something was matching my steps and memorizing my patterns. I think about how it wore my clothes and used my voice and carved my name into trees like it was claiming ownership. And I think about how it offered to share the land, how it said we could both hunt there like that was a reasonable compromise, like it didn't understand that I couldn't share space with something wearing my face. The land is still for sale as far as I know. I don't check the listings. I don't drive past it when I'm up north visiting family. I avoid that whole section of county road like it's quarantined. My brother asked once if I regretted selling. I said no. He said he missed hunting together on family land. I said I did too, but that some things aren't worth keeping. He didn't push. I think he understood. If you hunt on private land in the North Woods, check your trail cameras regularly. If you see something that looks like you but moves wrong, don't go back. Don't try to confront it. Don't try to understand it. Just leave. Sell the land. Walk away. Because some things don't want you dead. They just want what you have. And if you give them enough time and attention, they'll figure out how to take it. I learned that the hard way. I hope you don't have to. I got a voicemail from myself telling me not to come to work, but I was already in the parking lot when I listened to it. I'm a wildland firefighter based out of Missoula, Montana. Seasonal work, May through October, sometimes longer if the fires don't cooperate. I work on a Type 2 hand crew doing initial attack and mop-up operations across the northern Rockies. It's hard work, dangerous at times, but it pays well and keeps me outside instead of stuck in an office. Our crew operates out of a small Forest Service compound about 15 miles north of town. We've got a bunkhouse, a dispatch building, equipment storage, and a parking area for crew vehicles. Most of us live in Missoula during the season and drive out each morning for briefings and assignments. On August 14th, I pulled into the compound at 6:40 in the morning for a 7 a.m. briefing. The lot was empty except for 2 vehicles. The superintendent's truck and one other crew cab I didn't recognize. I parked, grabbed my red pack from the bed of my truck, and checked my phone while I waited for the rest of the crew to arrive. One voicemail, received at 6:15 that morning while I was driving. I hit play and put the phone to my ear. My own voice came through the speaker. Same tone, same slight rasp I get in the mornings before coffee. "Hey, it's me. Don't come in today. Something's off with the crew assignments. Just stay home. I'll explain later." I pulled the phone away and looked at the screen. The call had come from my number. Not a spoof number, not a similar number. My actual cell phone number, calling itself. I played it again. Same message, same voice. I checked my call log. No outgoing call at 6:15. I checked my sent messages. Nothing. My hands felt cold even though the morning was already warm. I sat there trying to make sense of it. Pocket dial that somehow recorded me talking. Phone glitch that pulled old audio. Prank from someone on the crew who'd figured out how to fake caller ID. None of it fit. The message was too specific, too clear, and the warning had a weight to it that felt real. I looked at the compound buildings. Lights were on in dispatch. The superintendent's truck sat in its usual spot. Everything looked normal, but the voicemail said, "Don't come in," and I've learned to trust my gut when something feels wrong in the woods. I was about to back out and leave when the superintendent, a guy named Garrett, came out of the dispatch building and waved me over. I grabbed my pack and walked toward him, phone still in my hand. "You're early," Garrett said. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "What's going on?" He glanced back at the dispatch building. "We've got a situation. Need you to take a ride with me before the rest of the crew gets here." "What kind of situation?" "Radio issue on the western unit. Repeater's down and we need someone to hike in and check the equipment. Should be quick, maybe 2 hours round trip. I'd do it myself, but I need to be here for the briefing." Something about the request felt off. We had protocols for equipment failures. Usually we'd send a tech from the communications department, not a crew member. And Garrett had never pulled me aside for solo assignments before. "Why me?" I asked. "You know the trail. You've done maintenance hikes to that repeater before." That was true. I'd hiked to the western repeater twice last season as part of training exercises. The trail was steep but straightforward, about 3 miles in through dense timber to a ridgetop site. "What about the morning briefing?" "I'll catch you up when you get back. This is priority. We've got 2 crews working in that area today and they need comms." I looked at my phone. The voicemail felt heavier in my mind now. "Don't come in today. Something's off." "Can I grab coffee first?" I asked, stalling. Garrett checked his watch. "Make it quick. I want you on the trail by 7. I walked to the bunkhouse and filled a thermos from the pot someone had started earlier. Through the window I could see Garrett talking on his radio. His body language looked tense, shoulders tight, jaw set. I pulled out my phone and called my roommate, another crew member named Jake. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried 2 other crew members. Same thing. No answer. I checked the time. 6:50. The crew should have been showing up by now. Morning briefings were mandatory and guys were usually early, grabbing coffee and bullshitting in the lot before the official start. But the lot was still empty except for my truck, Garrett's truck, and the unfamiliar crew cab. I walked back outside. Garrett was standing by his truck, gesturing for me to hurry up. I walked over and he opened the passenger door for me. "You driving me to the trailhead?" I asked. Yeah, it'll be faster. We can go over the details on the way. I climbed in. The truck smelled like diesel and old coffee. A topo map sat folded on the dash with the sections circled in red marker. Garrett got in the driver's side and started the engine without buckling his seatbelt. He never drove without buckling his seatbelt. It was one of his things. Safety first. Always. We pulled out of the compound and headed west on the forest road. Garrett drove in silence for the first few minutes. I watched the trees pass and thought about the voicemail. My voice telling me not to come in. The empty parking lot. The crew not answering phones. Where is everyone? I asked. Garrett glanced at me. What do you mean? The crew. No one's at the compound. They're on assignment already. Early morning deployment to the Rattlesnake fire. You weren't notified because we need you on this radio job. That didn't make sense. I would have gotten a text or call about an early deployment. Everyone would have. The crew didn't just disappear without communication. I didn't get a message about that, I said. Garrett's jaw tightened. Dispatch must have missed you. It happens. It didn't happen. Not on Garrett's crew. He ran a tight operation. No missed notifications. No communication breakdowns. I looked at the map on the dash. The red circle marked a location I didn't recognize. It wasn't near the western repeater. It was north, deeper into the wilderness, in an area we rarely worked. That's not the western repeater, I said, pointing at the map. Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't look at me. New location. They moved the equipment last month. I would have known about that. It was need to know. Communications department handled it. The road narrowed. We were heading away from the main forest roads into older, less maintained territory. I'd been in these woods for 3 seasons and I didn't recognize this route. I pulled out my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual this deep in the forest, but the timing felt wrong. I need to head back, I said. I'm not feeling good. Might be coming down with something. Garrett didn't slow down. We're almost there. 20 more minutes. I'm serious. I need to head back. He turned and looked at me. His eyes were wrong. The color was right. The shape was right. But something in the way he looked at me felt off, like he was studying me instead of seeing me. You're fine, he said. Just a little further. I reached for the door handle. Locked. I hit the unlock button. Nothing happened. Child safety locks engaged. Let me out, I said. Garrett smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Can't do that. We've got a job to finish. I tried the window controls. Disabled. I looked at the glove box, the center console, anywhere I could find the manual unlock. Garrett's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was cold and impossibly strong. Sit still, he said in Garrett's voice. Then, in my voice, you should have listened to the voicemail. My blood went cold. The voice that had warned me that morning had been real, and whatever was sitting in the driver's seat wearing Garrett's face had been the one trying to lure me in. I yanked my hand free and slammed my elbow into the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. Garrett, or whatever was driving, laughed, a sound that started in Garrett's register and slid into something lower and wetter. The truck stopped. We were on a narrow pullout surrounded by dense timber. No other vehicles. No trail markers. Just forest and silence. Get out, it said in Garrett's voice. No. It reached across and opened my door from the outside handle. Then it grabbed my pack and threw it out onto the ground. Get out or I'll drag you out. I looked at the tree line. If I ran, I might make it. The forest was thick. I knew how to move through timber, but I didn't know where I was or which direction led back to the compound. The thing wearing Garrett's face got out of the truck and walked around to my side. It stood in the open door, blocking my exit. Up close, I could see the details that were wrong. The proportions of the face were almost right, but slightly off. The hands were too long. The way it stood was too still, like it was holding a pose instead of standing naturally. Last chance, it said. Walk or be dragged. I climbed out. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold. The thing picked up my pack and handed it to me. You'll need this. For what? The hike. I'm not hiking anywhere with you. It tilted its head in that same wrong way the figure in Wisconsin had, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. "You are, because if you don't, I'll go back to the compound and wait for Jake, and then the others, one by one, until someone is smart enough to listen." Listen to what? That you shouldn't come to work when your own voice tells you not to. It started walking into the forest. After 10 steps, it stopped and turned back. "Keep up. The trail's easy if you don't fall behind." I stood there weighing my options. Run and hope I could find my way out. Stay and see where it was leading me. Fight and probably lose against something that was stronger and faster than it looked. I followed, not because I wanted to, but because the thing was right. If I didn't, it would go back for Jake, for the others, and I couldn't let that happen. We hiked for 40 minutes through trackless forest. No trail, no markers, just the thing wearing Garrett's face moving confidently through the trees and me following 5 yards behind with my hand on the bear spray clipped to my pack. We came to a clearing I'd never seen before. Small, maybe 50 feet across, ringed by old-growth ponderosa. In the center was a pile of equipment, radios, phones, packs, all of it arranged in a neat circle, like an offering. The thing stopped at the edge of the clearing and gestured toward the pile. "Yours is there, bottom left, red pack with the white logo." I looked where it pointed, my pack from last season, the one I'd lost on a training hike and reported missing. It sat in the pile exactly where the thing said it would be. "How did you get that?" "I've been collecting. Things you leave behind, things you forget. They help me learn you better." I scanned the pile. I recognized other items, a helmet from 2 seasons ago, a water bottle I'd lost in June, a knife that had fallen off my belt during a fire in July. All of it things I'd written off as lost in the field. All of it here. "What are you?" I asked. It smiled with Garrett's face. "I'm what watches when you think you're alone. I'm what learns when you think no one's paying attention. I'm what you become when I need to be you." "Why?" "Because it's easier to move through your world wearing your faces. Easier to get close. Easier to be trusted." "What do you want?" It gestured at the pile again. "Add yours, then leave. Go back to the compound. Tell them Garrett sent you home sick. Don't come back for 3 days. By then I'll be done." "Done with what?" "Learning the rest of your crew." My stomach turned. "I'm not helping you." "You already did. You followed me here. You showed me how you react under pressure, how you think, how you move. That's all I needed." It started walking back toward the tree line. Halfway there it stopped and looked back. The voicemail was a test, to see if you'd listen to yourself. Most don't. They think it's a glitch or a prank, but you hesitated. That means you're smarter than the others, smart enough to stay away. And if I don't stay away, it stepped into the shadows between the trees. Then I'll have to use what I learned today, and you won't like how that ends. It disappeared into the forest. I stood in the clearing listening to the silence. No birds, no wind, just the weight of being watched by something I couldn't see. I didn't add my pack to the pile. I didn't touch anything. I just marked the location in my mind and started walking. South felt right. The sun was higher and slightly to my left, which meant south was behind me. I walked that direction for 2 hours, using ridgelines and drainages to navigate, until I hit a forest road I recognized. I followed the road east for another hour until I reached a highway, flagged down a logging truck. The driver radioed the Forest Service and they sent a truck to pick me up. I told them I'd gotten turned around during a solo hike and needed extraction. They didn't push for details. Garrett was waiting at the compound when they dropped me off. The real Garrett. I could tell because he looked worried instead of calculating, because he asked if I was hurt instead of watching how I moved. I told him I'd gotten confused on a trail and panicked. He said it happens and not to worry about it. He asked if I wanted to take the rest of the day off. I said yes. Jake was in the parking lot loading gear. I asked him why he hadn't answered his phone that morning. He said he'd been at the dentist and had his phone off. I asked if the crew had deployed early to the rattlesnake fire. He looked confused and said no. Everyone had been at the morning briefing like always. I went home and listened to the voicemail again. My voice, clear and direct. Don't come in today. Something's off. I'd ignored it, almost. And because I'd hesitated, because I'd questioned, I'd survived. I called in sick for the next 3 days like the thing had told me to. I didn't explain why to Garrett. I just said I needed time off and he approved it without questions. On the 4th day I went back to work. Everything was normal. Briefing at 7, crews deployed to active fires. Garrett ran the operations like he always did, professional, focused, safe. But twice that day I saw him watching me from across the compound. And once, when I walked past him in the equipment bay, he said in a voice slightly off from his normal tone, "Glad you took my advice." I didn't respond. I just kept walking. That was 6 weeks ago. The season's winding down now. Fires are contained, or burning themselves out as fall weather moves in. The crew will demobilize in 3 weeks and we'll all go our separate ways until next May. I'm not coming back. I already told Garrett I'm taking a job with a crew based in Colorado. He accepted my resignation without comment, just shook my hand and said I'd been a good firefighter. When he shook my hand, his grip was cold. I don't know if the thing is still wearing Garrett's face or if it's moved on to someone else. I don't know if the real Garrett is still alive or if what I'm seeing every day is something else entirely. But I know that I got a warning in my own voice and I almost ignored it. I know that something in these woods has been watching us, learning us, collecting pieces of our lives so it can wear us better. And I know that the next time my phone rings from my own number, I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to listen, and then I'm going to leave. Because some warnings aren't pranks. Some voices telling you to stay away are the only version of you that's still trying to help. I learned that in a clearing full of lost things. I hope you never have to. If you work in remote areas and you start losing gear more often than normal, pay attention. If you get strange calls or messages from your own number, listen to them. If someone you work with starts acting slightly off, trust that feeling. And if anyone ever tells you to add your belongings to a pile in the woods, don't. Just leave. Because that pile isn't about collecting things. It's about collecting you. Stay aware out there. The woods are full of things that watch, and some of them are learning to be us. If you've ever gotten a call from your own number or felt like something was mimicking you, hit the like button and share your experience in the comments. That's all the stories for tonight. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and remember that sometimes the best survival skill is knowing when to listen to your own warning. Until next time.